The bullet that grazed Katherine Riley's window that scorching August morning in 1883 wasn't meant for her, but it still made her drop the wedding dress she'd been hemming for Mayor Henderson's daughter. Apache Junction, Arizona Territory had become lawless lately, with cattle rustlers and desperados making trouble nearly every week. But Katherine tried to keep her head down and her needle moving. At 24 years old and carrying more weight than most women in town, she'd learned that invisibility was her best defense against the cruelty of others. She pressed herself against the wall of her small seamstress shop, heart hammering, waiting for the shooting to stop. The gunfire lasted only a minute before Sheriff Tucker's voice boomed through the street, declaring order restored. Katherine exhaled slowly, retrieved the delicate ivory silk from where it had pooled on the floor, and returned to her work. Her fingers, despite their plumpness, moved with remarkable grace and precision through the fabric. She'd been sewing since she was 7 years old, back in St. Louis before her parents died of cholera and left her with nothing but a trunk of fabric scraps and her mother's sewing machine. That machine sat in the corner of her shop now, a treasured singer that she'd hauled across 3 states to make a new life in Arizona Territory. The shop itself was modest, just the front room where she met clients and displayed her work, and a small back room where she lived. A narrow bed, a washstand, a small stove, and shelves lined with thread, buttons, and bolts of fabric comprised her entire world. She told herself she was content. She had her work, her little bit of independence, and she didn't need anything more. But that was a lie she'd been telling herself for years. The truth surfaced every time she sewed a wedding dress, every time she altered a ball gown, every time she watched couples stroll past her window hand in hand. Katherine Riley wanted what every woman wanted, despite knowing that her size made such dreams foolish. She'd seen the way men looked at her, or rather, the way they looked right through her as if she didn't exist. She'd heard the whispers, the jokes, the casual cruelty that people seemed to think she couldn't hear. The worst part was that she'd started to believe them. Started to think maybe she didn't deserve love, didn't deserve to be seen as a woman rather than just a figure of ridicule. The dance was announced 3 weeks later, a harvest celebration to be held in the town's largest barn. Mrs. Henderson herself came to Katherine's shop to commission not 1 but 3 new dresses for the occasion, bringing her daughter Lucille and their housekeeper along. "We simply must look our best," Mrs. Henderson declared, her corseted figure sweeping through the shop like a ship in full sail. "Mr. Henderson is running for territorial representative, you know, and we must make the right impression." Katherine measured and pinned, nodded and smiled, and took careful notes about necklines and sleeve lengths. Lucille, pretty and 17 with blonde ringlets and a waist Katherine could probably span with both hands, chattered endlessly about which young men might ask her to dance. "Will you be attending, Miss Riley?" Lucille asked with what seemed like genuine interest. Before Katherine could answer, Mrs. Henderson cut in. "Oh, I'm sure Miss Riley will be far too busy with orders. Besides, these events can be so exhausting, all that dancing and socializing. Not everyone is suited for such exertion." The dismissal was clear, wrapped in a thin veneer of concern. Katherine kept her expression neutral. "I'll certainly consider attending if my work allows." After they left, she stood in the empty shop, looking at her reflection in the long mirror she used for fittings. The woman looking back at her had a pretty enough face, she supposed, with dark curls that framed round cheeks and green eyes that her mother had once called striking. But the rest of her was large, undeniably so, soft and round in a world that prized delicate frames and tiny waists. She turned away from the mirror and threw herself into her work. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of stitching and fitting. Katherine worked late into the evenings, her lamp burning long after the other shops on Main Street had gone dark. She completed Mrs. Henderson's dresses, along with orders for half a dozen other women in town. Each dress was a small masterpiece, perfectly fitted, beautifully detailed, a testament to her skill and artistry. She tried not to think about the dance, tried not to imagine what it might be like to wear a beautiful dress herself, to have a man take her hand and lead her onto the floor, to feel music move through her body as she spun and swayed. But 3 days before the dance, something shifted inside her. She finished the last of her commissions early and found herself standing before her shelves of fabric, running her hands over a bolt of deep emerald green silk she'd been saving for something special. The color would bring out her eyes, would complement her dark hair beautifully. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled the bolt down and began cutting. She worked through the night, and by dawn, she'd created something remarkable. The dress had a fitted bodice that didn't try to minimize her figure, but instead embraced it, showing off the curve of her full bust and the line of her waist. The neckline was modest but flattering, and the sleeves were fitted to the elbow before flaring slightly. The skirt fell in elegant folds, the silk catching the light beautifully. She'd even fashioned a matching wrap for her shoulders. When she tried it on and looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a woman going to a dance, a woman who deserved to be there. A woman who might, just might, be worthy of someone's attention. The thought terrified her. She almost talked herself out of going a dozen times. On the evening of the dance, she dressed carefully, arranged her hair with the heated iron, and even applied a bit of rouge to her cheeks and lips, luxuries she'd purchased years ago but never used. Then she stood in her little room, paralyzed by fear. What was she thinking? She'd be a laughingstock. People would whisper and point and laugh. It would be social suicide, and worse, it would hurt in ways she wasn't sure she could bear. But something stubbornly refused to let her take the dress off. Some small, defiant part of her that was tired of hiding, tired of making herself small, tired of believing she deserved less than anyone else. So she wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, locked up her shop, and walked the 3 blocks to Henderson's barn as the sun set over the desert mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Music spilled out into the evening air as she approached. Someone had strung lanterns across the entrance and throughout the interior, giving everything a warm, magical glow. Wagons and horses lined the area, and people streamed through the wide doors in their finest clothes. Katherine took a deep breath and walked inside. The barn had been transformed. The usual smell of hay and animals had been replaced with the scent of pine boughs and wildflowers. Tables lined the walls, laden with food and punch. A small platform had been erected at one end where a group of musicians played a lively tune. And in the center, couples spun and stepped in time to the music for a moment. Katherine just stood there, taking it all in. It was more beautiful than she'd imagined. Then she felt the first stare. Then another. Heads began to turn, conversations paused. She saw Mrs. Henderson's expression shift from surprise to something like disapproval. Saw Lucille whisper something behind her fan to her companions. Saw young men exchange glances and smirks. Katherine's courage faltered. This had been a terrible mistake. She was about to turn and flee when she heard the voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss, but I don't believe I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance." She turned to find herself facing a tall man, probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and kind brown eyes. He wore clean but simple clothes, a white shirt and dark vest, trousers and boots that had seen hard work but were polished for the occasion. His brown hair was neatly combed, and he held his hat in his hands. "I'm Katherine Riley," she managed to say. "I own the Seamstress shop on Main Street." "Austin James," he said, and his smile seemed genuine. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town, cattle mostly, some horses." He paused, then added, "That's a beautiful dress you're wearing." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, I made it myself." "Did you now?" "That's quite a talent." He looked around the barn, then back at her. "Are you here with someone?" "No, I came alone." "Well then, Miss Riley, would you do me the honor of signing my dance card?" "I'm afraid I don't actually have one, being a simple rancher, but I'd surely love to have your company for a dance or two this evening." Katherine stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want to dance with me?" Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like understanding mixed with sadness. "I can think of nothing I'd like more if you're willing." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a laugh cut through the air. Sharp and cruel, it came from a group of young men standing near the punch table. One of them, Thomas Parker, the son of the town's banker, was looking directly at her. "Careful, James," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the barn. "You might need to reinforce your floorboards before attempting that." His companions erupted in laughter. Other conversations stopped. Katherine felt the attention of the entire barn focus on her, felt the weight of their judgment and amusement. The beautiful evening shattered around her like broken glass. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed in front of these people. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Excuse me," she whispered to Austin James and turned toward the door. She'd made it 3 steps when his voice rang out, clear and hard as iron. "Thomas Parker, you apologize to Miss Riley right now." The barn went completely silent. Katherine stopped walking but didn't turn around. "I was just having a bit of fun, James," Thomas said, but his voice had lost some of its swagger. "You insulted a lady in public," Austin said, and now Katherine did turn to look at him. His expression had transformed from kind to dangerous, his jaw set and his eyes cold. "Where I come from, that requires an apology and possibly more. So you can apologize right now, or you and I can step outside and discuss it further." Thomas paled. Austin James might have been a simple rancher, but he was also 6 feet of solid muscle, with the kind of strength that came from years of hard work. Thomas was soft by comparison, a town boy who'd never done a real day's labor in his life. "I apologize, Miss Riley," Thomas mumbled, staring at his shoes. "My comment was inappropriate." Austin looked at Katherine. "Is that acceptable to you, madam?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then the matter is settled," Austin announced to the barn at large. "And if anyone else has similar thoughts, I suggest you keep them to yourself unless you want to discuss them with me personally." He crossed to Katherine in 3 long strides and offered her his arm. "Now, Miss Riley, I believe we were discussing a dance." Katherine looked up at him, this stranger who just defended her honor in front of the entire town. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Standing up for me, asking me to dance. You don't even know me." Austin's expression softened. "I know that you walked in here alone, wearing a dress you made with your own hands, looking beautiful and brave. I know that Thomas Parker is a coward who thinks cruelty is clever. And I know that I came to this dance hoping to find interesting company, and you strike me as the most interesting person here." He paused. "Plus, I really do love that shade of green." Despite everything, Katherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. "You're either very kind or very strange." "Can't I be both?" He wiggled his offered arm slightly. "Come on, Miss Riley. Let's show these people how a waltz is properly done." She hesitated only a moment more before taking his arm. It was solid and warm beneath her hand, and he led her onto the dance floor with complete confidence. The musicians, who'd stopped playing during the confrontation, started up again with a slower tune, a waltz. Austin positioned them properly, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. "I should warn you," he said quietly, "I'm not exactly a graceful dancer. Spent more time with cattle than in ballrooms." "I've never danced with a partner before," Katherine admitted. "Only practiced alone in my shop. Then we'll figure it out together." And somehow they did. Austin was true to his word about not being particularly graceful. He occasionally stepped on her foot or went the wrong direction, but he laughed at his own mistakes and kept going. Katherine found herself relaxing, letting the music guide her, following his lead even when it was imperfect. They must have looked ridiculous, she thought. The large seamstress and the rancher, stumbling through a waltz while the rest of the town watched. But when she looked up at Austin's face, she saw only concentration, and then, when he caught her looking, a warm smile. "You're good at this," he said. "Natural rhythm." "You're a terrible liar," she replied, but she was smiling too. "All right, you're better than me, but that's a low bar." He spun her a bit too fast, and they both stumbled, laughing. "See what I mean?" By the time the song ended, Katherine realized something remarkable had happened. She'd forgotten to be self-conscious. She'd forgotten to worry about how she looked or what people were thinking. She'd just been dancing, enjoying herself, feeling the music and the moment. Austin bowed to her formally. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Riley. That was the most fun I've had in months." "Thank you," she said. "And thank you for what you did earlier. No one has ever defended me like that." His expression turned serious. Anyone with basic decency would have done the same. "You'd be surprised." Before he could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared at Katherine's elbow. "Miss Riley, might I have a word?" Katherine braced herself for a lecture about propriety or staying in her place, but Mrs. Henderson surprised her. "I wanted to apologize for my earlier comment about the dance," she said, her voice low. "It was unkind and I'm ashamed of myself. You look lovely tonight and you've every right to be here." She glanced at Austin. "And Mr. James is quite right about Thomas Parker. I'll be having words with his father." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Katherine managed after she swept away. Austin grinned. "See, already changing hearts and minds, or you scared everyone into being polite. That works too." He glanced toward the refreshment table. "Would you like some punch?" "I promise to defend it from anyone who makes jokes about the bowl running dry." Katherine laughed despite herself. "That's terrible." "I warned you I was strange." He offered his arm again. "Come on. I saw them put out some of Mrs. Martinez's empanadas, and those are worth coming to these things all by themselves." They spent the next hour together, talking by the refreshment table, taking a turn around the barn to look at the decorations, dancing twice more. Austin told her about his ranch, about how he'd come to Arizona Territory 5 years ago from Texas after his father died and left him a small inheritance. He'd bought the land when it was nothing but scrub and wild cattle, and built it into something profitable through sheer stubborn work. "It's not much," he said. "Small operation, just me and 2 hired men, but it's mine and I'm proud of it." Katherine told him about her parents, about learning to sew, about the journey west that had been equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. "I wanted to go somewhere new," she explained. "Somewhere I could build my own life without everyone knowing my history, without the weight of being the orphan girl from the church charity." "Did you find that here?" she considered. "Mostly. People need a seamstress, so they tolerate me, but I'm not exactly part of the community." "Why not?" "Look at me, Mr. James. I am looking at you. I see a talented businesswoman with a sharp wit and lovely eyes. What am I supposed to be seeing?" Katherine felt something crack open in her chest, something painful and hopeful all at once. "You know what I mean." Austin was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "My mother was a large woman, bigger than you, actually. My father loved her with his whole heart, from the day they met until the day she died when I was 15. He used to say she was the most beautiful woman in Texas, and he meant it." He met her eyes. "I learned from him that beauty comes in all forms, and that judging someone by their size is about as stupid as judging them by their height or the color of their hair. That's a rare perspective. Maybe, but it's the right one." They were interrupted by the musicians announcing the last dance of the evening. Austin immediately turned to Katherine. "May I have the honor?" This time she didn't hesitate. "Yes." The final waltz was slower, more romantic. Austin held her a bit closer, and Katherine allowed herself to lean into him slightly, to feel the solidness of his presence. Other couples swirled around them, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the man holding her, on the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth his time and attention. When the music ended and people began gathering their things to leave, Katherine felt a sharp pang of disappointment. The evening was over, and with it, this strange, wonderful interlude from her normal life. Austin walked her outside, where the night air had cooled and stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky. Her shop was in the opposite direction from where he'd tied his horse, but he insisted on escorting her home. "Can't have a lady walking alone at night," he said, "even if it is just 3 blocks." They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. When they reached her shop, Katherine unlocked the door, then turned to face him. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "You turned what could have been the worst evening of my life into something I'll always remember." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Riley." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "I was wondering if I might call on you sometime, perhaps take you to dinner if you'd be willing." Katherine's heart stuttered. "You want to court me? Is that so surprising?" "Yes," she said honestly, "very surprising." Austin smiled. "Then maybe I should work on being more clear about my intentions." "Yes, Miss Riley, I would very much like to court you. I find you intelligent, talented, funny, and lovely to look at. I enjoyed every minute of this evening, and I'd like very much to see you again." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to question you, but I just don't understand. You could court any woman in town. Why me?" He stepped closer, and in the lamplight from her window his expression was completely sincere. "Because when I talk to you, you listen. Because you have calluses on your fingers from hard work, just like I do. Because you were brave enough to come to that dance alone even though you were scared. Because your laugh is genuine and your smile lights up your whole face." He paused. "And because I've been coming into town every week for 5 years, seeing all those any women you mentioned, and not one of them ever made me want to do more than tip my hat and keep walking. But you, I want to know you, want to understand what you think and dream about. Want to see you smile again." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. "I would like that too," she whispered. "Very much. Sunday then, I could come by after church, take you for a drive and a picnic." "That sounds wonderful." Austin grinned, looking pleased and relieved. "Good, that's good." He backed toward the street, still smiling. "Sunday then. Good night, Miss Riley." "Good night, Mr. James and Austin." "Yes, you can call me Katherine." His smile widened. "Good night, Katherine." She watched him walk away until he turned the corner, then slipped inside her shop and leaned against the door, her heart racing. Had that really just happened? Had a handsome, kind man really just asked to court her? She moved to the mirror, looking at her reflection in the green silk dress. The same woman looked back at her, but somehow everything felt different. She felt different, like something inside her had shifted and expanded. For the first time in years, Katherine Riley allowed herself to hope. Sleep was impossible. She lay in her narrow bed, replaying every moment of the evening. Austin's defense of her honor, the way he'd held her while they danced, the sincerity in his voice when he'd asked to court her. It all felt like a dream, too good to be true. Doubt crept in as the night wore on. What if he changed his mind? What if Sunday came and he didn't show up, and she'd learn it had all been some cruel joke? What if people talked him out of it, convinced him that courting the large seamstress would damage his reputation? But when Sunday arrived and Katherine heard the sound of a wagon pulling up outside her shop, right on time, the doubt evaporated. She dressed carefully in a simple blue day dress, also of her own making, and pinned her hair up beneath a bonnet. When she stepped outside, Austin was waiting beside a well-maintained wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. "Good afternoon," he said, sweeping off his hat. "You look lovely." "Thank you, so do you," he did. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt, with a leather vest that brought out the brown of his eyes. His hair was still damp, suggesting he'd bathed recently, and he smelled of soap and sunshine. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands strong and steady at her waist, then climbed up beside her and took up the reins. "I thought we'd drive out toward the ranch, find a nice spot for a picnic. There's a creek that runs through my property that's particularly pretty this time of year." "That sounds perfect." They drove through town, and Katherine was aware of people watching, of conversations pausing as they passed. But Austin seemed completely unbothered, nodding politely to people they passed, and keeping up an easy stream of conversation about the weather and the town news. Once they left Apache Junction behind, Katherine began to relax. The desert stretched out around them, beautiful in its starkness. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, and in the distance, mountains rose against the brilliant blue sky. The air was hot but dry, and a light breeze made it bearable. "Tell me about your ranch," Katherine said. "What's it like?" Austin's face lit up. "It's hard work, I'll be honest about that. Cattle are stubborn creatures, and water's always a concern out here. But when I sit on my porch in the evening and look out over land that's mine, land I've built something on, there's no better feeling." He guided the horses around a rough patch. "I've got about 200 head right now, hoping to build that up over the next few years. Got good grazing land, and like I said, that creek runs year-round, which is rare out here. You live alone, just me in the house. My two hands, Miguel and Sam, they've got their own places on the property. Both good men, hard workers." He glanced at her. "It does get lonely sometimes, though. I'm not much for town socializing, prefer smaller gatherings. But coming home to an empty house every night, eating dinner alone, that gets old." "I know what you mean," Katherine said. "I live above my shop, just one room. It's quiet most of the time, sometimes too quiet." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon rattling over the rough road. Katherine found herself stealing glances at Austin, studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with practiced ease. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. At the dance, you said your mother was a large woman, and that your father loved her. Did people give them trouble about it, about them being together?" Austin was quiet for a long moment. "Some did, especially at first. My father's family didn't approve. Thought he should marry someone more refined, someone who fit their idea of what a rancher's wife should look like." He smiled slightly. "My father told them all to go to hell, pardon my language. He married my mother anyway, and they had 25 happy years together before she got sick." "Do you remember her well?" "Every day. She was strong, Katherine. Not just physically, though she could work as hard as any ranch hand, but strong in her spirit. She didn't let people's opinions diminish her. She held her head high and lived her life on her own terms." He looked at Katherine directly. You remind me of her in that way, coming to that dance even though you knew it might be difficult. That took real courage. I almost didn't go, but you did. That's what matters. They reached his property after about an hour of driving. Austin pointed out the boundaries, showed her the areas where his cattle grazed, explained his plans for expansion. Katherine could hear the pride and passion in his voice, could see how much the land meant to him. The creek he'd mentioned ran through a small grove of cottonwood trees, a splash of green in the brown landscape. The water was clear and shallow, burbling over smooth rocks. Austin pulled the wagon into the shade and helped Katherine down, then retrieved a basket from the back. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, spreading a blanket on the ground near the creek. "But I managed to put together some bread and cheese, some dried meat, and Mrs. Martinez sold me some of her famous sugar cookies. It looks wonderful." They settled on the blanket and Katherine helped lay out the food. It was simple fare, but after the wagon ride she was hungry. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily. Austin asked about her work, and she found herself describing the satisfaction of taking fabric and thread and creating something beautiful, something that made people feel special when they wore it. "Each person is different," she explained. "Different sizes, different shapes, different colorings. The trick is understanding what will work for each individual body, how to highlight their best features and create balance. It's like solving a puzzle every time." "That sounds like an art form." "It is, in a way. I love it. Love seeing someone's face when they try on something I've made and see themselves looking their best." Austin leaned back on his elbows, looking at her with undisguised admiration. "You really are remarkable, you know that." Katherine felt heat rise to her face. "I'm really not. I'm just a seamstress. You're a businesswoman who runs her own shop, supports herself, creates beautiful things with her hands. That's remarkable in my book." He sat up again, his expression turning more serious. "Katherine, I need to tell you something. I'm not a man who plays games or courts a woman lightly. If I'm spending time with you, it's because I'm serious about seeing where this might go. I'm not looking for a casual flirtation. I'm looking for a partner, a wife eventually, if the right woman comes along." Katherine's breath caught. "That's very direct. I believe in being honest about intentions. If that's not what you're looking for, I respect that, but I wanted you to know where I stand." She looked at him, at this man who barely knew her but was already talking about the future with such certainty. "I've never been courted before," she said quietly. "Never had anyone interested in me that way, so I don't know what I'm looking for because I never thought it was a possibility. And now I'm terrified and excited and confused all at once." She twisted her hands in her lap. "What if you're wrong about me? What if you get to know me better and realize I'm not who you think I am?" Austin reached over and gently took one of her hands. His was warm and rough with calluses, completely engulfing hers. "Then we'll find that out together." "But Katherine, I'm not wrong about the important things. I know you're kind. I saw that in how you treated Mrs. Henderson even after she was dismissive to you. I know you're brave, or you wouldn't have come to that dance. I know you're talented and hardworking. The rest, all the little details, that's what courting is for. Getting to know each other, seeing if we suit. What if people talk? What if courting me damages your reputation or your business?" His jaw tightened. "Anyone who judges my business based on who I court isn't someone I want to do business with anyway. And as for reputation, I care a lot more about being a good man than being popular." Katherine looked down at their joined hands. His thumb was making small circles on her palm, probably without him even realizing it. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her. "I'd like to see where this goes to," she said finally. "I'm scared, but I want to try." Austin's face broke into a wide smile. "That's all I'm asking." We'll take it slow, get to know each other properly. No pressure, no expectations beyond spending time together and seeing what happens." They stayed by the creek for several more hours, talking and laughing. Austin told her stories about ranch life, about ornery cattle and clever horses, about the time a rattlesnake got into his kitchen, and he'd had to chase it out with a broom. Katherine shared memories of her parents, of learning to sew, of the challenges of running a business as a single woman in a territory that didn't always take women seriously. "How did you end up in Apache Junction specifically?" Austin asked. "Honestly, I stuck a pin in a map." At his surprised look, she laughed. "I'm serious. I knew I wanted to go west, somewhere with opportunity and room to grow. I had a map of the territories spread out on a table, closed my eyes and stabbed it with a pin. The pin landed on Arizona territory, and Apache Junction was the nearest town of decent size. So I sold everything I couldn't carry, packed my sewing machine and supplies, and bought a ticket on the stage. That's incredibly brave, or incredibly foolish." "I wasn't sure which for the first few months." She smiled at the memory. "I arrived with barely enough money to rent the shop for 3 months. I was terrified I wouldn't get enough business, that I'd end up destitute in a strange place. But people need clothes, and good seamstresses are valuable. I survived those first months, then started to build a reputation. Now I have more work than I can handle sometimes. You should be proud of that." "I am," she said, and realized it was true. She'd spent so long focused on what she didn't have, on what she thought she'd never have, that she'd forgotten to appreciate what she'd accomplished. "I really am." The sun was starting to sink lower when they finally packed up and headed back to town. Katherine felt pleasantly tired, sun-warmed and full and happier than she could remember being in a long time. Austin drove with one hand, the other resting near hers on the seat between them, close enough that their fingers occasionally brushed with the wagon's movement. When they reached her shop, he helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door. "Thank you for today," he said. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I. Thank you for the picnic. May I call on you again, perhaps Wednesday evening? I need to come into town for supplies anyway, and I thought maybe we could have dinner at the hotel restaurant." "I'd like that very much." Austin smiled, then did something that surprised her. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Wednesday then, Katherine." She watched him drive away, then floated into her shop, touching the hand he'd kissed like she could preserve the feeling. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Austin would come into town twice a week, sometimes 3 times, always with an excuse about supplies or business, but really to see Katherine. They'd have dinner or take walks, or sometimes he'd just sit in her shop while she worked and they'd talk. He proved to be excellent company, quick-witted and thoughtful, a good listener who asked insightful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Katherine found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone. She told him about the loneliness of her life, about the casual cruelties she'd endured, about her dreams of maybe expanding her business someday, hiring an assistant, maybe even opening a second location in one of the larger cities. In turn, Austin shared his own vulnerabilities. He talked about the pressure he felt to make his ranch successful, to prove his father's faith in him had been justified. He admitted to his own loneliness, to wondering if he'd spend his whole life alone because he could never find someone who understood him. "I dated a few women back in Texas," he confessed one evening as they sat on the bench outside her shop watching the sun set. "Nice enough ladies, but it always felt forced, like we were playing roles, saying what we thought we should say. It never felt real." "And this does?" Katherine asked. "Feel real, more real than anything I've experienced before." He looked at her, his expression serious. "With you, I feel like I can just be myself. No pretense, no performance, just me." "I feel the same way," she said softly. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. They'd progressed to casual touches over the weeks, nothing improper but enough to make Katherine's heart race. She loved the way his hand felt wrapped around hers, loved the casual intimacy of it. The town's opinion seemed divided on their courtship. Some people, like Mrs. Henderson and the sheriff, seemed genuinely happy for them. Others, like Thomas Parker and his set, made snide comments and jokes. But Austin had been right when he said he didn't care what people thought. He walked through town with Katherine on his arm, proud and unbothered by the whispers. About a month into their courtship, Austin invited Katherine to visit the ranch properly, to see the house and meet his hired men. She accepted eagerly, curious to see more of his life. The ranch house was modest but well built, a sturdy wooden structure with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Inside, it was clearly a bachelor's domain, sparsely furnished and meticulously clean but lacking any decorative touches. "It's not much," Austin said, showing her around. "But it's solid, good bones. Built it myself with help from Miguel and Sam." "It's wonderful," Katherine said, and meant it. She could see the potential in the space, could imagine curtains on the windows and rugs on the floors, could picture the house transformed from a functional shelter into a real home. Miguel and Sam proved to be friendly, respectful men who clearly thought highly of their boss. They joined them for lunch, and Katherine enjoyed their company, their stories about ranch life and their gentle teasing of Austin. After lunch, Austin took her riding. He'd brought a gentle mare from town specifically for her, knowing she'd never been on a horse before. "Just sit easy and let her do the work," he instructed, helping her into the saddle. "She's old and sweet-tempered, won't give you any trouble." Katherine was terrified at first, sitting so high up, feeling the horse move beneath her. But Austin rode alongside her on his own horse, keeping up a steady stream of reassuring talk, and gradually she relaxed into it. They rode out across the property, and Austin pointed out different features, his plans for development, the areas where he hoped to expand. "I want to build this into something lasting," he said. "Something I can pass down to my children someday, something that will outlast me." "You'll do it," Katherine said with certainty. "You have the vision and the determination." He smiled at her. "Having someone believe in me, that means more than you know." They stopped on a rise that overlooked much of the property. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and a light breeze ruffled their hair. Austin dismounted and helped Katherine down, then stood beside her, both of them looking out over the land. "I can see why you love it here," Katherine said. "It's beautiful in its own way." "It is," Austin agreed, but when she glanced over, he was looking at her, not the view. Something shifted between them in that moment. The air felt charged, weighted with possibility. Austin reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bonnet behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Katherine," he said softly, "may I kiss you?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be kissed by a man who saw her as beautiful. His lips met hers gently, carefully, a sweet pressure that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, nothing improper or too forward, but when they pulled apart, Katherine felt fundamentally changed. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Austin admitted, his voice rough. "I'm glad you did." He smiled and kissed her again, just as gently but with perhaps a bit more confidence. Katherine's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers. When they finally pulled apart for the second time, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Just so you know." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered back, and saying the words out loud made them feel more real, more powerful. They rode back to the house in the golden light of evening, hands occasionally brushing, stealing glances at each other. Katherine felt like she was floating, like her heart might burst from happiness. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened. They saw each other as often as Austin's work and Katherine's commissions allowed. They kissed more freely now, stolen moments on her doorstep or in the shade of the cottonwoods by the creek. Austin was always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but Katherine found herself wanting more, wanting to be closer to him in every way. 2 months into their courtship, Austin asked her to have dinner at his ranch. "I'll cook this time," he promised. "Or at least, I'll try. Miguel's wife gave me a recipe for chicken stew that she swears is foolproof." Katherine arrived to find the house transformed. Austin had clearly put enormous effort into preparing for her visit. Wildflowers filled jars on the table, which was set with what must have been his best dishes. Lanterns hung from the porch, creating a warm glow. And when he served the food, it was actually quite good, the stew flavorful and the bread fresh. "Did you really make this?" she asked, impressed. "I had supervision," he admitted. "Miguel stood in the doorway and directed me, but I did all the actual work and I only burned 1 pot in the process." After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Austin had his arm around her shoulders and Katherine leaned into him, perfectly content. "I have something to ask you," Austin said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that made Katherine sit up and look at him. "What is it?" He took both of her hands in his, meeting her eyes directly. "Katherine Riley, I know we've only been courting for 2 months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're everything I've ever wanted in a partner. You're intelligent and talented and funny and beautiful. You challenge me and support me and make me want to be a better man. I love you with my whole heart." He took a breath. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. 2 months ago, she'd thought herself destined for loneliness, thought love was something she'd never experience. And now this incredible man was asking her to marry him, looking at her with such love and hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Austin let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and joy into it, and Katherine kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Austin produced a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small emerald that exactly matched the dress she'd worn to that first dance. "I had it made special," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "Wanted it to remind you of the night we met." "It's perfect," she said, admiring the way it caught the lamplight. "You're perfect. Far from it, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." They talked late into the night, making plans. They decided on a small wedding, just close friends, to be held in 6 weeks. That would give Katherine time to finish her current commissions and make her own wedding dress, and give Austin time to prepare the ranch house for a wife. "I'll need to add on to the house," he said. "Make more room, make it comfortable for you. I want you to feel like it's your home, not just mine." "I already feel that way," Katherine assured him. "But I won't say no to more space. Maybe a proper sewing room. Somewhere I can take commissions from home sometimes. Anything you want. I want you to keep your business, Katherine. I know how much it means to you. Really. You don't mind having a wife who works, Mind, I'm proud of it. Proud of you. We'll figure out the logistics, but I'd never ask you to give up something you love. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Katherine finished her outstanding commissions and began making her wedding dress, pouring all her skill and love into the creation. She chose a cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim, designing something that would flatter her figure and make her feel beautiful on her wedding day. Mrs. Henderson and several other women from town threw her a small wedding party, presenting her with linens and dishes and other household items. The gesture touched Katherine deeply, especially after years of feeling excluded from the community. "We're glad you're staying in Apache Junction," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "Even if you'll be living out at the ranch, you're part of this town, Katherine, and we're happy to see you find such joy." Austin was equally busy preparing the ranch house. True to his word, he added a room onto the house, a bright space with large windows for sewing and shelves for fabric and supplies. He bought new furniture for the bedroom, a larger bed and a proper dresser. He even attempted to make curtains, though he eventually admitted defeat and commissioned Katherine's assistant, a young woman named Sarah, whom Katherine had recently hired to help manage the shop, to make them instead. The wedding took place on a clear October morning, the heat of summer finally broken. They held it at the church in Apache Junction, with the reception at the ranch afterward. Katherine wore her cream silk dress and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. Austin wore a new suit, purchased specially for the occasion, and looked so handsome that Katherine's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When Austin said his vows, promising to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives, his voice was strong and sure. Katherine's voice shook slightly with emotion when she said hers, but the love in her words was unmistakable. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Austin kissed her, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Katherine felt tears of joy streaming down her face as Austin held her close, his own eyes wet. "Mrs. James," he whispered against her hair, "my beautiful wife." The reception at the ranch was lively despite the small number of guests. Miguel and Sam had strung lanterns and helped set up tables. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Katherine danced with her new husband, no longer caring if she stumbled or looked graceful, only caring that she was in his arms. As the sun set and guests began to leave, Austin and Katherine stood on their porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon disappeared down the road, Austin turned to her with a smile. "Alone at last, Mrs. James," Katherine smiled back, her heart full. "I love the sound of that, Mrs. James." He swept her up in his arms, making her squeal in surprise. "Austin, you'll hurt your back." "You let me worry about that," he said, carrying her over the threshold into their home. Their home. The thought filled Katherine with wonder. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Austin loved her with patience and tenderness, making her feel cherished and desired in ways she'd never imagined. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Katherine felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. "Happy?" Austin asked, his hand stroking her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. 6 months ago, I thought I'd spend my whole life alone, and now I'm here with you and it feels like a dream. If it's a dream, I don't ever want to wake up." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Katherine. I love you too." Their first year of marriage was full of adjustment and joy. Katherine divided her time between the ranch and her shop in town. She went into Apache Junction 3 days a week to meet with clients and work on commissions, with Sarah managing things the other days. The arrangement worked well, allowing Katherine to maintain her business while also building her life with Austin. She threw herself into making the ranch house a home, sewing curtains and tablecloths, adding decorative touches that softened the formerly stark space. She planted a garden near the house, vegetables and herbs that would be practical, and also flowers that were purely for beauty. She learned to cook, with guidance from Miguel's wife Rosa, who became a good friend. Austin, in turn, supported Katherine's work in every way he could. He built her additional shelves for her sewing room and never complained when she spent hours absorbed in a complicated commission. He bragged about her talent to anyone who would listen, encouraging people to commission her work. Their relationship deepened as they navigated the everyday intimacy of married life. They learned each other's habits and rhythms, learned how to argue productively, and how to make each other laugh. They made love frequently, Austin never tiring of showing Katherine how beautiful and desirable he found her. In the spring, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Austin. When she finally did, over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "Truly," he said, his face lighting up. "We're going to have a baby in about 6 months if I'm calculating correctly." Austin jumped up from the table, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around, laughing. "This is the best news. The absolute best news. We're going to be parents." "Austin, put me down before you hurt yourself," Katherine said, laughing. He set her down but kept his arms around her, his hands moving to rest on her belly. "A baby, our baby. Katherine, I can't believe it. We're going to be a family." "We already are a family," she said softly. "You're right, we are." He kissed her tenderly. "But now we're growing, and that's amazing." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine struggled with nausea in the early months and discomfort as her already substantial frame grew larger. But Austin was attentive and supportive, fetching her whatever she needed, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reassuring her constantly that she was beautiful. As her pregnancy advanced, Katherine had to reduce her time at the shop, finding it too exhausting to make the trip into town. Instead, she worked from home, with Sarah bringing materials and completed commissions back and forth. Some clients grumbled about the arrangement, but most were understanding, and Katherine maintained enough business to feel productive. In November, as the weather cooled again, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the town's midwife and Rosa. Austin paced anxiously outside the bedroom, and when the baby's first cry finally rang out, he burst into the room despite the midwife's protests. "Is Katherine all right? Is the baby all right?" "Both fine," the midwife said briskly. "You have a son, Mr. James." Austin approached the bed where Katherine lay, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle. He looked down at his son, at the tiny red face and dark hair, and tears began streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Austin said, his voice breaking. "Katherine, he's absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. Austin took the baby with careful, reverent hands, cradling him against his chest. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your papa. And I promise I'm going to do everything I can to be a good one." They named him Thomas William James, Thomas after Austin's father and William after Katherine's. Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, healthy and alert. Austin was a devoted father, changing nappies and walking the floor at night when the baby cried, insisting that Katherine rest and recover. "You did the hard work carrying him and bringing him into the world," he said. "The least I can do is handle a few sleepless nights." Watching Austin with their son filled Katherine's heart to overflowing. He was so gentle, so patient, singing to the baby in his off-key voice and talking to him constantly, even though Thomas was too young to understand. The months turned into years, and their family grew. 2 years after Thomas, they had a daughter they named Lily, with Katherine's dark curls and Austin's brown eyes. 3 years after that, another son, James, who came into the world yelling and kept up the noise for his entire infancy. The ranch prospered as well. Austin's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to expand the operation, buy more cattle, hire additional help. They built a larger house, one with proper bedrooms for all the children and an even better sewing room for Katherine. Katherine's business continued to thrive. As the children grew older and needed her less, she increased her hours at the shop again. Sarah had become a skilled seamstress in her own right, and together they handled a steady stream of commissions. Katherine's reputation had spread beyond Apache Junction, and clients came from surrounding towns to commission her work. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle and money was tight. There were times when the children were sick and Katherine was beside herself with worry. There were arguments, sometimes heated, about money or the children or the thousand small things that married couples disagree about. But through it all, their love remained constant. Austin still looked at Katherine with the same admiration and desire he'd shown at that first dance. Katherine still felt her heart flutter when Austin walked into a room. They still made each other laugh, still supported each other's dreams, still came together at the end of each day grateful for what they'd built together. On their 10th anniversary, Austin surprised Katherine with a trip back to Apache Junction for dinner and dancing at the same barn where they'd met. It had been renovated since then, turned into a proper community hall, but the memories remained. "Remember this place?" Austin asked as they walked in, the same lanterns lighting the space. "How could I forget? This is where my life changed." Katherine looked around, remembering that terrified young woman in the green dress. "I almost didn't come, you know, almost talked myself out of it. I'm grateful you didn't." Walking in and seeing you, even though we'd never spoken before, something just clicked. I knew I wanted to know you. They danced, older now and perhaps not quite as energetic as they'd been a decade ago, but still moving together with practiced ease. Katherine's figure had changed after 3 children, even larger than before, but Austin's arms still held her close, his expression still full of love. When they returned home late that night, they found the children asleep and the house quiet. Miguel and Rosa, who'd watched the children for the evening, had left everything tidy. Austin banked the fire while Katherine checked on each child, tucking blankets and smoothing hair. In their bedroom, Austin helped her out of her dress, his fingers gentle on the buttons. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said, kissing her shoulder. "You need spectacles," Katherine teased, but she believed him. Over the years, Austin had taught her to see herself through his eyes, to value herself not just for her talents or her role as mother and wife, but for herself as a woman worthy of love and desire. "My vision is perfect," he said, pulling her close. "And I see the woman I've loved for 10 years, the woman I'll love for the rest of my life." They made love slowly, tenderly, a decade of intimacy making them perfectly attuned to each other. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a lonely seamstress expecting nothing but solitude, to a woman with a partner, children, a home, a life full of love and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked, his hand stroking her arm. "Just about how grateful I am, for you, for our family, for all of this. I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I until I met you," he kissed her hair. "You changed everything for me, Katherine, made me understand what love really means." "We changed each other," she said. "That's what partners do." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with the cattle alongside his father. Lily showed an early interest in sewing, often sitting in Katherine's shop and learning the trade. James, their youngest, was all energy and mischief, keeping them constantly on their toes. Katherine's parents might not have lived to see her find happiness, but she felt their presence in the life she'd built. She'd taken the skills her mother taught her and created a successful business. She'd taken her father's advice about being brave and used it to step into that barn all those years ago, changing the course of her life. When Thomas turned 15, he asked his father to teach him to run the ranch. Austin was thrilled, spending long hours with his eldest son, passing down everything he knew. Katherine saw her husband in the boy, the same strong work ethic, the same integrity and kindness. Lily, at 13, had become skilled enough to help in the shop, taking on simple commissions under Katherine's guidance. She had her mother's eye for color and fit, her father's easy way with people. Katherine knew that if Lily wanted it, she could take over the business someday. And James, at 10, was still figuring out his path. He loved the ranch but also showed an interest in books and learning. Katherine and Austin talked about sending him to school in one of the bigger cities when he was older, giving him opportunities they'd never had. Apache Junction had grown over the years as well. The territory was moving toward statehood, bringing more people and more prosperity. New businesses opened, new houses were built. The little seamstress shop that Katherine had opened with such hope and fear was now one of the established businesses in town, known throughout the region for quality work. Katherine and Austin had become respected members of the community. Austin served on the Territorial Ranchers Association, helping to establish fair practices and protect smaller ranchers from being pushed out by larger operations. Katherine was involved in the church and had helped establish a charitable fund that helped widows and unmarried women get training in trades so they could support themselves. On a warm spring evening when Katherine was 42 and Austin was 49, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they'd maintained for years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. The children were inside doing their evening chores and the ranch was peaceful around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked suddenly. "Choosing me, I mean. Your life might have been easier if you'd married someone more conventional." Austin turned to look at her, his expression startled. "Regret it, Katherine. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made." "Why would you even ask that?" she shrugged, suddenly feeling foolish. "I don't know. I just sometimes wonder if you ever wish things were different." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had so many times over the years. "Listen to me. Marrying you gave me everything I ever wanted. A partner who understands me, who challenges me, who makes me laugh. 3 incredible children. A home that's actually a home, not just a house. Purpose and joy and love." He squeezed her hand. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I've never once regretted choosing you, never even thought about it, even though I'm fat." The word came out more bitter than she intended. "You're beautiful," he said firmly. "You're the exact right size and shape because you're you, and I love you exactly as you are." He pulled her closer. "Katherine, after 20 years, haven't I proven that your size means nothing to me except that there's more of you to love?" She leaned into him, feeling his solid warmth, his steady presence. "You have, I'm sorry. Sometimes the old insecurities just resurface. I know, and I'll keep reassuring you for as long as it takes, for the rest of our lives if necessary." He kissed her temple. "You're stuck with me, Mrs. James. No getting rid of me now." "I don't want to get rid of you," she said, smiling. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. From inside the house, they could hear their children talking and laughing, the sounds of a family comfortable with each other. "We did good," Austin said softly. "Built something real here, something lasting." "We did," Katherine agreed, "and we're not done yet. Still more life to live, more memories to make." "More gray hairs to grow," Austin added, running a hand through his hair, which had started to silver at the temples. "You look distinguished," Katherine said loyally, though her own hair was showing threads of silver too. "We're getting old together," Austin said, and there was wonder in his voice. "Just like I always hoped we would." As the years continued to pass, they faced the challenges that came with aging. Austin's back bothered him more, legacy of decades of ranch work. Katherine's hands sometimes ached from all the years of sewing, though she refused to stop working. They slowed down but didn't stop, adapting to their changing bodies while maintaining their active lives. Thomas married at 23, bringing home a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the James property, and Thomas took over more and more of the daily ranch operations, allowing Austin to step back slightly. Katherine and Austin became grandparents when Thomas and Emma's son was born, a robust boy they named Austin after his grandfather. Holding her grandson for the first time, Katherine was overcome with emotion. "Our grandson," she whispered to Austin, who was peering over her shoulder at the baby. "We have a grandson. He's perfect," Austin said, his voice thick. "Just perfect." Lily married at 21, choosing a lawyer from Phoenix who'd come to Apache Junction to establish a practice. Katherine worried about her daughter moving to the city, but Lily thrived there, eventually opening her own dressmaking shop that became quite successful. She visited often, bringing her own children to see the ranch. James went to university in Tucson, studying to become a teacher. He was the first in either family to get such an education, and both Katherine and Austin were immensely proud. He eventually returned to Apache Junction to teach at the growing school, marrying a fellow teacher and building a house in town. Katherine and Austin found themselves in their 60s with a house that was often too quiet, but frequently filled with visiting children and grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management. Katherine finally retired from daily work at the shop, though she still took on special commissions occasionally, more for the love of the craft than from financial necessity. They had time now, time to travel a bit, to visit their children, to simply enjoy each other's company. They took a trip to California to see the ocean, something neither had done before. They visited St. Louis, where Katherine showed Austin where she'd grown up. They went to Texas to see Austin's father's grave and the land where he'd spent his boyhood. But mostly they stayed at the ranch, the place they'd built together. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands, still talked and laughed and occasionally argued. The passion of their early years had mellowed into something deeper, a bone-deep partnership and love that had withstood decades of life's ups and downs. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. It was held in the same community hall where they'd met all those years ago, now properly renovated with a real floor and proper windows. Friends and family came from all over, celebrating the couple who'd become a cornerstone of the community. Katherine wore a dress she'd made herself, still skilled despite her age. It was a deep blue this time, elegant and well-fitted. Austin wore his best suit and looked at her with the same admiration he'd shown 30 years earlier. "Remember when I asked you to dance?" he said as they took to the floor for the first waltz. "I remember everything about that night," Katherine said. "I remember being terrified. I remember you defending me against Thomas Parker. I remember falling in love with you between one moment and the next." "Best night of my life," Austin said, spinning her gently, "until our wedding night, and the night each of our children were born, and really most nights since then." Katherine laughed. "Smooth talker. Only with you." He pulled her closer. "I love you, Katherine James. More now than I did 30 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "I love you too," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for being brave enough to come to a dance where you didn't think you belonged. Thank you for saying yes when I asked to court you. Thank you for building this life with me." They danced, surrounded by family and friends, their grandchildren watching with the fascination of the young seeing their elders being romantic. Katherine rested her head on Austin's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his arms around her. This was happiness, she thought. Not the dramatic, sweep you off your feet happiness of new love, though they'd had that too. But this deeper contentment, this sense of being exactly where you belonged with exactly who you belonged with. The years moved forward, as years do. They celebrated more anniversaries, welcomed more grandchildren, dealt with the inevitable losses that come with age. Friends passed away, their own health issues cropped up. The world around them continued to change as Arizona officially became a state, and the new century brought technological advances they'd never imagined. Through it all, they had each other. When Katherine was 72 and Austin was 79, his heart began to fail. The doctor was frank about the prognosis. Austin had perhaps a year, maybe less. They could move to Phoenix, seek more advanced medical care, but Austin refused. "I want to be at home," he said firmly. "On my ranch with my family. I've lived a good life, and I want to end it in the place I love most." Katherine's heart broke, but she understood. This ranch was as much a part of Austin as his own heartbeat. She couldn't imagine him anywhere else. They made the most of the time they had left. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently. Austin spent his good days sitting on the porch, looking out over the land he'd built his life on. Katherine sat beside him, sewing or reading or just holding his hand. "I'm not afraid," Austin told her one evening as the sun set in brilliant colors. "I've had a good life. Better than I ever dreamed possible. I've loved and been loved. I've seen my children grow and thrive. I've held my grandchildren. I've spent 50 years with the love of my life." A man couldn't ask for more. "I'm not ready to lose you," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, my love, I know." He squeezed her hand, his grip weaker than it once was but still warm. "But you'll be all right. You're the strongest person I know, and you won't be alone. Our children, our grandchildren, they all love you. They'll take care of you. It won't be the same without you." "No," he agreed, "but you'll find a way forward. You always have." Austin passed away on a clear spring morning, Katherine holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," directed at her, and he went peacefully, without pain. The funeral was huge, seemingly the entire territory turning out to pay respects to a man who'd been fair and honest and kind throughout his life. Katherine stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and said goodbye to her partner of 50 years. The months after Austin's death were the hardest of Katherine's life. The ranch felt empty without him, every room holding memories. She moved into town, into a small house near Lily's old shop, which was now run by her granddaughter. She couldn't bear to stay in the ranch house without Austin, though Thomas and Emma still lived on the property and kept the ranch running. But Katherine was a survivor. She'd survived the loss of her parents, survived loneliness and ridicule and hardship. And she survived this too. Slowly, painfully, she found a way forward. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, threw herself into sewing projects, became involved in community work. She lived 5 more years after Austin's death, years filled with family and purpose, if not quite the same joy she'd known with him. She got to meet her great-grandchildren, got to see the ranch continue to prosper, got to see her granddaughter's dressmaking business expand to multiple locations. When Katherine died at 77, peacefully in her sleep, she was buried next to Austin in the cemetery overlooking his beloved ranch. The headstone was simple, reading Katherine Riley James, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She made the world more beautiful. At her funeral, their children and grandchildren spoke of a love story that had become legend in the family. The story of the seamstress who almost didn't go to the dance, and the rancher who saw her beauty when no one else did. The story of a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Thomas, now an old man himself, told the story to his great-grandchildren. "Your great-grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew," he said. "She walked into that dance when everything told her to stay home. And because she was brave, because she was willing to be seen, she found love. Found my father who loved her until his last breath. Found a family, built a legacy." And in the ranch house that had been expanded and updated over the generations, but still stood on the land Austin had claimed, that legacy continued. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons Katherine and Austin had taught. That love comes in unexpected forms, that courage matters more than conformity, that building something lasting requires both strength and gentleness, that seeing and being seen by another person is the greatest gift we can give or receive. The green silk dress that Katherine wore to that first dance was carefully preserved, passed down through the generations as a family treasure. Brides wore it or carried it, a reminder of where their family's story truly began in that Arizona barn on an August evening in 1883, when a rancher asked a seamstress to waltz and changed both their lives forever. Their story became more than just a personal history. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, the truth that love and worthiness aren't determined by society's narrow standards. It became a story told and retold, evolving with each generation but always maintaining its essential truth. That real love sees the person, not the package, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments contain the most extraordinary magic. And so the story lived on, just as Katherine and Austin lived on through their descendants, through the ranch that still bore the James name, through the community they'd helped build, through every person who heard their story and learned that love is always worth the risk, always worth being brave enough to walk through the door and into the dance, because you never know who might be waiting on the other side, ready to see you for exactly who you are.